Yeah, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Thank you very much for your coming to our panel discussion, Africans Rising, Can Activism Change the World? ? My name is Franz Schmiediel and I'm in charge of the Africa Policy Desk at the VIDC. I'm very happy to welcome our distinguished speakers of today, Grace Atuhaire and Luisa Steinwender, then Jason, the scientist, and last but not least, Mutemi Wakiyama, and also our moderator, Teclaire Ngo Tam. Thank you very much for participating. I also would welcome our participants on the African continent. It's an experiment for us also. Our friends and comrades from the Pan-African Network, Africans Rising, and all the others who will join us via Zoom. Thank you very much. Just a technical remark, please, all people in the chat, in the Zoom, use the chat and mute your microphones that we have no disturbances. And I would like to take this, at this point, to thank Africans Rising for this good collaboration. I would like to thank the Austrian Development Agency, ADA, for their financial support, and all my colleagues, especially Irene Hochauer-Kaboda and Mael Nauser, for their assistance in preparing this event. On the chairs you will find a questionnaire, and later on also in the Zoom. Please make use of them, fill it in and give us your comments and critiques. Well, why we have organized this event? I had the privilege to listen to some of the meetings of African Risings, and I was really impressed about the stories of the activists, the stories from the movements from all the different countries. And I got the impression maybe we can learn a lot from them. So that's one reason. And then I asked myself, are their struggles, are they linked to our activism here in Europe, here in Austria? And the struggle for dignity and justice, which is part of Africans Rising in the African countries, cannot be separated from the struggle against racism and discrimination in Europe and in Austria. Because human dignity and human rights are universal. And let's frame it in other words of a former liberation activist and later president of Mozambique, Samora Machel, I think you know him, who said, international solidarity is fighting for the same objectives in different terrains. And this is what we try to achieve. On this point, I would like to recommend the book, Globale Solidarität, written by Alexander Baer, who is with us today. And it really gives a good overview about solidarity in the past, but also today. Thank you for this book. Another subject of today's discussion will be climate activism. And just one figure. An average Ugandan causes 150 kilograms of carbon dioxide emission per person per year. One Austrian, 7,300, so more than 20 times more. But the people in Uganda and the global south generally, they are paying the high price for the climate crisis. Tens of millions of people lost their livelihoods. Alone in the Horn of Africa, 21 billion people face acute food insecurity. And not only because of climate crisis, but also because of climate crisis. And I think we need to change our imperial lifestyle and policies in Europe, in Austria, that positive changes, improvements are possible in the global south. Because the climate crisis, it's discussed always as a future scenario here, but in the global south, it's already reality today and not a future issue. But now, before I hand over to our moderator, Declaration, who is an education expert, by the way, and a trainer working at the Austrian organization, the Südwind. I would like to give the floor, or the screen, I don't know how to say, to Hardy Yakubi. He is the coordinator of Africans Rising, and I think you are sitting in Accra, Ghana, isn't it? Thank you very much. I wish you an inspiring and interesting evening, and it's your turn. We can't hear at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes. Perfect.
Okay, yeah, so greetings. Greetings, everyone. I'm happy to see that everything is set and this event is about to kick off. Greetings to all our comrades in the room. Greetings to my comrades Femi and Grace, and thank you for taking the time to travel to Australia to represent Africans Rising. We're very delighted to be in cooperation with VIDC for this conversation, and hopefully it is a conversation that dovetails us into a bigger collaboration on how to ensure that activism and activists are empowered and given the necessary support to be able to achieve the world that we want. We are here in this conversation and in this discussion because we have come to a point in the world where various pressures have converged to bring about one of the monumental emergencies that humanity has ever faced. And what are these pressures? We have pressures from the climate emergency, catastrophe, pressure from inequality, high inequality, that is unprecedented, where a few of the world population has control and ownership of so much more than they need, whilst vast masses of the world's population do not even have what it takes to survive on a daily basis. And so these pressures, in addition to the governance issues, shrinking civic spaces in Africa and Europe and in the world, rise of certain ideologies that are completely at variance with world progress, and the rise of people who want to take advantage of the people's suffering in order to enrich themselves and to further destroy our ecological and climate harmony. We must ensure that we do not fall victim once again. We must ensure that we are in a position to fight back and to create a new system that brings about harmony and that does not destroy our environment. And this is the role of activists. And a friend of mine once told me that even if we had Jesus Christ or Prophet Muhammad as the leader of the world or the president of any country, there will still be activists, because every human endeavor, always requires somebody else to be watching, especially when it has to do with the exercise of power, because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolute. And it is activists, it is movement people, it is advocates, people who refuse to take things lying down, people who refuse that things must be accepted the way they are, if they are not right. People who envision a world that is something other than the unequal world that we are in. People who see the world as something other than the climate catastrophe that we have brought upon ourselves, and are striving day and night, putting their lives in danger and ensuring that the voices of the voiceless continue to be heard, and that somebody is always there to put in check governments, corporations, private entities, even NGOs who exercise power over resources or over the public collective mindset. I would like to thank everybody and say that I am happy to be in this conversation. Africans Rising was founded on this specific noble idea that Africans all over the world can come together instead of fighting individually or in silos, can come together in solidarity and ensure that whatever happens in one part of Africa or in another part of the African diaspora affects each other African, and that we are able to rise in solidarity against the forces that wish to keep us down forever. We must keep this noble idea, because it is the spirit of Ubuntu that I am because we are, and we are because I am. That the survival and triumph of one is predicated upon the survival and triumph of all, and that the survival and triumph of all is predicated on the survival and triumph of one, and each one of us. And therefore, solidarity is a necessary part of human survival and triumph, and we cannot, as the spirit of Ubuntu or the principle of Ubuntu would dictate to us, allow ourselves to recoil back into our small cocoons when the pressures of the world are conniving and conspiring and coming together, combining themselves in historical and contemporary fashion in order to keep the oppression of the poor and the marginalized going. We who envision a different world, we who see a world that is grounded in equality and ecological harmony, must not give up. And we will change them. Activism changes the world. We will change it, but only if it is done in consonance with the spirit of Ubuntu, in solidarity, in consonance, in unity. Because the forces that are against, forces that wish to keep us down, are together. They act in concert, whether they are conspiring at night or in daytime. We must be together in order to be able to stand up to them. But not only that, but also in order to be able to envision the kind of world that we want to live in, and to create that world as an antithesis to the world that we now currently detest, but must live in. In conclusion, I would say that Africans Rising is happy to be in this conversation. The Kilimanjaro Declaration, which is a vision document of Africans Rising, calls for solidarity, it calls for unity, it calls for our commitment to fight for gender justice, reparations, African unity and solidarity with peoples of the world who are in combat with the forces of oppression. We will continue to be in solidarity, and we want to assure that whoever wants a better world is our comrade. Whoever wants to maintain the oppressive systems is in battle with us, and we do not shy away from battle. Thank you very much, comrades, and have a good discussion.
Yeah, thank you. So now there's no need to give you a definition of an activist. Thank you for your words. I'm very honored to be here tonight with you. Some of you will see each other again. I'm very happy. Some of you, that will be the first time. I'm also happy. I'm surrounded by activists. So don't, if I like, you will understand. Let me welcome them. Jason DeSantis. Hello, Jason.
Hi.
Yeah.
Jason, yes.
Jason DeSantis is actually a science teacher and musician of spoken word. Yeah. And then Lucia Steinwender. Hallo, Lucia.
Hallo, danke für die Einladung.
Geht's dir gut?
Invitation.
Super. Aber Lucia hat Lobau gestoppt. Also,
all by myself.
Yeah, you stopped this one. So I'm like, with you, I needed to speak a word. But very welcome.
Thank you.
Grace, hello.
Hello.
Grace is actually from Uganda, but she lives in Germany. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation.
And you're a poet. You're a poet and freelancer writer and social justice activist. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, last but not the least, we have Mutemi Wakyama, coming from Kenya, very famous activist in Kenya, but he doesn't like being famous. So we are very happy. The topic of tonight is about activism. That's why I really want you as well to be very active tonight. On your seat, you will see cards, colorful ones, 3 colors. So you need to have them always ready, because I can put a question at any time to you. And the answers will be like, every time you will answer with a yes, you will show which color? Green, yeah. If you're like, no way, which color? Red. If you're like, I don't know, I'm not sure, it will be yellow. But you will put it in the way that I can see you. The first question I will put to you is a question that I will ask again at the end of our sharing, so that I can measure what way you have gone throughout the discussion. And this is the question: can activism change the world for the good? What do you answer for that? Oh, no, right? So, okay, then we go home. But maybe after our sharing, you will show red. Let's see, because our sharing will be on 2 parts. The first part, our speakers will just tell us, let us know what they're doing, what are their field of activism, just like giving fact and what they need us to know about the activity to know them better. In the second part, we will challenge them with questions and reflections and trying to know more. Do you agree? Yeah, bravo. Green card. Okay, to welcome our guests that come from abroad, we start with Austria. That's why, and now I'm not going to invite Jason to tell us about what they're doing in activism.
Okay, so that's very valid to this conversation. So my name is Jason, and as you can see here, it says Jason the Scientist. And the reason why I point that out is because I'm not turning up as someone who's representing a group. I'm not turning up as someone who is claiming to be an activist. But I'm turning up as actually the artist, the scientist, the individual who is engaged in life matters. And it just so happens that I'm a black male who has encountered various similarities across the world as we travel, which has forced me to uphold and look seriously at what it means, the question of culture. And in doing so, I lend myself and have overlapped with a variety of black community groups. But as I said at the beginning, I'm not specifically part of any, apart from VIDC, which is, as I'm a teacher, I'm involved within the education reform that we're looking to actually apply here in Austria. I don't know if any of you are familiar, but there was actually a discussion that was taking place in this exact room where a film called Welcome to Sodom was introduced to the school system as a valued thing to share with students regarding positions and places of African people. It was specifically about electronic waste in Ghana. This electronic waste in Ghana is it's definitely not high on the world scale, put it that way. So you ask yourself, if we're focusing on something like waste, electro waste in particular, why are you showing the students Ghana specifically? And if you don't have much information regarding other African realities, and you highlight this one, what is the true narrative that is going to be received by the students? So off the back of this, I, as I said, as a teacher, became more involved, and Akwe Lamti actually was spearheading this whole discussion that needed to take place between the Ministry of Education and educators that live here. The Ministry of Education, of course, in Austria, and educators that live here. And, we had a serious discussion with a number of Ghanaian representatives that presented themselves to challenge what's being given, because it's a narrative that is told to students that information that you're given, if you haven't got direct contact with people and know and are able to frame your own realities according to what's directly presented in front of you, and teachers are presenting this one snapshot, and that's the only thing that you have to see with African people, African diasporans. It's heavily, it's basically the whole thing pushed towards stereotyping. It pushed towards a very narrow framing of African reality. So in challenging this, I've become very much engaged in education reform by the group called VIDC, Advancing Equality Within the Austrian School System. So I was asked by friends if I could speak here today. And I had to ask myself, well, it's particularly about climate activism. I'm not a climate activist. Why would I say yes to turning up? And I recognize that there's a great power. First and foremost, I see the value in myself as an artist, which is probably why I put forward myself as the artist. The work that I do as an artist, of course, is something that I don't shy away from Black realities. but I'm also engaged in creating harmony within our living spaces. So I'm currently working on a collection of pieces that I called Earth Tone Poems, and it speaks to a broader perspective. Even though I come from physical sciences, my background is in physical science, I've actually moved myself away from teaching within schools and positioned myself outside of that framework, because I feel that the narrative that we're teaching students is actually very, very limiting. It's been over 100 years since we've touched into, science itself has actually touched into something called consciousness, which is a very difficult question, and they're fighting against it. But as a black person living in, well, just as a human being living in this world, and by my realities that I understand, science cannot answer them all according to its limiting physical perspective, its materialistic way of doing things, its materialistic vantage point. And because we've been over 100 years past that, and science to this day is still fighting to hold our children, hold our minds, and hold us into a limited perspective of physical reality, that I had to move myself away to actually talk specifically. So my other area, apart from dealing with music, as a science enthusiast, my area of interest that is the largest focus for myself is where science meets spirit. And science has met the spirit. And they're in such a denial to hold on to this limited worldview that I don't know when it will reach the students. So probably the main thing that I would like to invite into this conversation is to value the individual. That is why I turned up as myself without representing or calling for other groups, even though I'm related to many other groups. And the reason why I say that is because in a lot of academic spaces, when people turn up, especially in the West, they put part of themselves outside. They turn up as a limited person who dares not to point out the elephant in the room because their voice has been muted by a group consensus that they're generally following. The strength of a group, in my perspective, is determined by the strength of the wholeness of each individual. If you limit and shrink the individual, when they turn up to these spaces, their voice will be limited and shrunk too. So that's why I'm able to sit here quite comfortably and present myself and bring myself in this conversation, because there's often a limited perspective that is dominated by a Western narrative. And you've seen it happen time and time again. You see Western feminism, and then the world cries out, but there's a lot of other realities as well. So I'm presenting myself as the whole individual that won't leave any part of myself out of the door when engaging in this discourse. So there's one other thing that I was asked to talk about, because climate activism, as I said, isn't my forte per se. And it's to do with like Black history, what we are doing as a Black community within Austria, what are the Black communities doing, what are we engaged in, and so on. And to be honest, I'm thankful to be able to say that there's a lot going on. There's huge numbers of groups that could be named, that thankfully their presence is being felt within Austria. There are groups that are such as, and I have tons to list. I kind of wanted to share a number of them, but I can already see that it's not really about sharing too much detail on any specific groups per se. But I briefly will share a few. So we have a number of different groups that have presented themselves in Austria since 1961, whether they be Pan-African Students' Union, PASAL, NANCA, Nigerian Students' Union, etc. Much of their work isn't documented because it started before the online fever was present. It started before we could actually just pick a phone and just click a button and collect the information that's being here. So the documentation is not quite so present. However, we have groups such as PANAFA with Kojo Taylor, who brought a lot of unifying together. And that's one of the strongest points, that if we operate unified and together and not against, we are 1 + 1 doesn't really equal 2 when you're unified and harmonized. Yeah, it can be much greater than. So Pamoja with Arab Arthur Johnston and many others were the first to create the Black History Month in Austria, and they were very instrumental in organizing the march for Marcus Omafuma. And not only did they organize the march, which is of course highly valuable, but they got a lot of media coverage. Off the back of that, the police officers who murdered him received 8 months. It's a relatively small amount of time for murdering someone. Haider called him a drug dealer, and his wife took him to court, and he lost. Defamation. So we're looking already at the legal structures having question marks on them. We have questions regarding media itself. As the Kronenzeitung were happy to say, oh, it seems like he was mistaken for, in other cases, mistaken for drug dealers because of the white scarf. There are certain narratives that are prevailing and continue to be pushed by the structures that exist here, that the groups in Austria that are actively pushing against. So if I was to continue just with a few other examples, but I think that one is just one to point out that it does question the political, the judiciary, and the media that exists within Austria. It shows something that is very present in a structural way. Moving forward, we've had a huge number of groups, including, and I just want to point out a couple more, Fresh Sein and Black Austria, who've created Black Austria with Simon Inu and his team, Beverly Muntui, and they talk about lots of information from things Black. So Black Austria is one to look out for, which includes the Fresh Sein magazine, and also the radio show of the young Black diasporans. And also the Black Austrian movement, who are currently tackling leadership and employment and racial stereotypes currently, and with PANAFA looking at the inequality regarding what's going on in Ukraine, especially to racially regarding the African diasporans coming out of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. I know my time is up because I've spoken quite maybe long, I don't know. Everything is relative, huh? So the last thing that I do want to say...
Don't try me.
Huh?
Don't try me.
Okay. The last thing I want to say is that we have a great force of people here. And there is a huge structure that is Austrian, white, and countering us and our presence and our ability to thrive. So that is to set up the narrative of the dynamics that we're existing in right now. That's a little overview that I was asked to share with you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this overview. I think maybe we can put our hands together because really like a teacher speaking. I have taken note of some points, like especially this welcome to Sodom, and maybe we'll talk about that afterwards when we talk about the transnational activism, because I suppose maybe the movie maker was thinking being very activist by doing that. So that's give us a good ground for discussion in the second round. As it happens that Lucia has been a student of Jason.
It's a shame to hear you're not teaching anymore.
So now it's time for you to show your teacher what you have learned. So, Lucia, you're a climate activist, and you're a member of the movement with the motto, system change, not climate change. What do you mean about that?
Yeah, so after I left school, I found out about the real world. No, and yeah, since about almost 6 years, actually, I'm part of this group, System Change, Not Climate Change, that was founded in 2015. And as the name already says, we think that the climate crisis is rooted in the system, a system that produces not to satisfy needs, but to produce profit. And so that's how we have to tackle this crisis. And what we try to do is by that also tackle the dominant discourse that really individualizes the problem, saying that we by ourselves need to change our consumption, and we do, because as Franz has already mentioned in the introduction, it's globally very unjust, and we also have to change our imperial mode of living, as some put it. But at the same time, it's really rooted in the system, and there are actors who are profiting from the system. For example, fossil corporations who are blocking every attempt to change something and to overcome this injustice. And so I think what we really try to do, or our strategies as a group, is with activism or actionism to try to make this visible. And I think when we speak about alliances like today, maybe even a step before that is to look for conflict, which might sound counterintuitive. But I think we really have to make visible who is profiting from this crisis and who isn't. And that's why we organize actions. A very recent one was an intervention at the Opera Ball, where many very wealthy, rich and powerful people come together, and to show that while these people are having a party, other people are suffering, are drowning, are burning from this crisis. And another conflict, which was, I think, our biggest success so far, was Lobau bleibt. So about 1 year ago, we managed to stop one of the biggest fossil projects in Austria, a huge highway around Vienna. And I think, and that is what I would add to this conflict strategy, is that I think during the course of conflict, sometimes you only then you realize who your opponents are. And Hadi, I think in his very powerful introduction, said everyone who is fighting with us for a better world is our comrade, and everybody who confronts us in the struggle is our enemy, I think he said, or something similar to this. And I think for us, now when I look back, we went into this struggle in a very naive way, not just remembering we came there about 40, 50 of us, and we thought, okay, we're going to block this construction site for one day, and then the police came but left again, and we weren't evicted, and so we ended up staying and occupying another construction site. And in the end, we stayed for 8 months, building 3 camps and staying over a very cold winter. And so the start was naive as well, but I think only after a few months we really realized who we are confronting in the struggle, that the Social Democratic Party is really protecting the interests of very powerful construction corporations, such as the Strabag, for example. And when we were, so when the Social Democratic City Council tried to, or threatened to sue us with very, very high fines, even minors, 13-year-olds, but also scientists from the Technical University, city and traffic planners who criticized this project publicly on social media. About 50 of us got these threatening letters. And then a few weeks later, there was a fire attack on one of the camps during the night when there were 7 people inside. And yeah, we don't even want to imagine what could have happened. But the mayor of Vienna, his only comment was that, yeah, this is, you see the consequence of political protest like this. And so I think before we look for alliances, it's very important to look for conflict, because that can really transform our consciousness of who our comrades are and who our enemies are, let's put it like this. And of course, there's not just 2 groups, because we know that it's more complicated and that many people in Austria are also, globally speaking, profiting from this crisis. But I think entering this kind of conflict can try to tackle very powerful ideologies like racism or nationalism or classism also, and try to transform our consciousness, who profits from this crisis and who doesn't, and which alliances we should look for.
Thank you very much for that. What were the reason why you were trying to stop this plan? Because our guests don't know what Lobau is.
Yeah, so the Lobau Highway is, or would be, would have been, hopefully, a very huge highway connecting, I mean, the Social Democratic Party likes to put it as just necessary for the people living in the outskirts of Vienna, but it's actually a very relevant part of the 1025, so it's a trans-European network for transportation, mostly of commodities.
Okay.
Yeah. And since traffic is the biggest or the most climate damaging sector in Austria. That's why we tackle it.
Thank you for this explanation, so we now better understand what was going on. And you mentioned that it's good to know who's your opponent, just in order to show who is who. So when you get into the negotiations, they will know I'm dealing with a very strong movement. That is it. And while we were doing this, I was like, oh my gosh, man. In my country, they're trying to build a highway for 20 years now, and they don't succeed. And you are stopping the building of a highway, guys. So maybe that's another reality where, like, when we talk transnational movement, maybe those kind of points we can put together to see, okay, in one word, they are stopping the building of highways, and in the other hand, they don't even have ways, and not to mention highways. But never mind, thank you very much. That was to show you what we are up to in Austria. You see, we are like very bad guys. And now we like to see what you can offer. So your activism, you're doing it in Uganda, not in Germany, where you live now. So your activities are based in Uganda, am I right?
I think a bit of everywhere on the continent. Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
I'm a member of Africans Rising, and as part of the membership, I think I've been able to like last year we had an annual meeting where we were reflecting on the 5-year strategy that we had, and the need to relieve the Kilimanjaro Declaration that was created like about 2016 into the changing times. We had COVID-19 and also the impact of like the early tensions around the Russia-Ukrainian war were also like very imminent on the continent, and reflecting on also other changes around like the continued civic spaces and all that. To see how do we know what has changed for us, what has failed, what is working, and how best to re-energize around all those, and also come up with some clear campaigns that we could do jointly on the continent. And so, yeah, so it was really nice for me to be part of that process. And thereafter, like right now, I'm very passionate about a borderless African campaign that we are doing, and which is basically about implementing the Africa Border Protocol that's already existing. Coming from Germany to here, just not being able to apply for another visa or being asked to apply or someone stamping to my passport, I think for me was really nice, and it would be nice to have it also for my people and my family to experience, crossing the neighboring countries and being able to freely travel around the continent, I think is a dream for most of us. So Africans Rising creates an opportunity for us to meet, be able to connect with so many communities, or so many movements and other activists around the continent and in the diaspora, because we have issues which are contextual to where we come from, but they are quite common in a lot of ways. And some of our actions were failing because of the continued, of course, the shrinking political space. And we also need to learn to what are the new ways we have to use in restricted spaces. So there was need for much more reflective conversation, and it was really, really good to have it and be able to have joint campaigns together. So yeah, since I mentioned that I was coming from Germany, and basically currently living in southern Germany, writing my PhD on securitization of African communities, which for me I'm fascinated by it because we have communities that are, since independence, that have always had presence of military, and I'm quite curious about it, and was interested for me to perhaps to be able to know what conditions states to act that way, and 50 years on to still be acting that way towards these border communities. So yeah, that's what I'm doing, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Did you mention the years of when did you start this movement?
The conversations, for sure, the conversations in Africa and within activist or NGO space and human rights groups started definitely before 2015, but 2015 I think was quite a moment where everybody was in nuance that there's so many challenges a lot of organizations and civil society is facing, and there needs to be a bit of like capacity development, shared learning, need for reflections, but also like a need to have a movement of movements also, not to repeat each other's work, but rather learn more from each other, work better with each other. And within now our strategy is also to have a closer relationship with the diaspora, because when you organize from Africa, I think there's much more connections with like the US as opposed to the African diaspora in Europe. So we are on the journey to make connections and be able to see how do we support all our causes.
I try to make a picture in my mind, like the movement started and then it spread out. Because in my mind, I have Africa's big space, no? So how are you transferring this and convincing people to join?
I think it's, we didn't really convince people because movements were there, or organizations or different activist groups have always been on the continent, but we've not had linkages. We are not transnationally connected to each other, and we are not able to speak to each other and because a lot of the time we have solutions internally, but we don't know how to, how to transfer them. So that self-reflection of the gap, then there already inherently was a collective acceptance that there needs to create a coordination group across the continent that will be able to galvanize everybody and recruit all of us to be able to work better.
Okay. Yeah, you really was almost better than the African Union. Tell me more about the FemWise Africa. That's special on women.
Well, it's good you talked about African Union because FemWise Africa is actually an African Union mandated network that was passed to advance women in peace and security. On the continent, there's a lot of both armed conflicts, but also hotspots for unspated conflicts or continued conflicts. And women on the continent, there's so many issues around that, but also as actors in facilitating a lot of peace building or mediating conflicts, there's not been a space for us. And so it's been great to be able to be part of like formally accepted networks that, and also formally accepted roles that women have always been playing and officially being given a support. So in that, as an individual, like I'm just collaborating with a lot of women peace builders in my country so that we can domesticate that protocol that was passed on FemWise Africa and be able to officialize and like train more women into peace building.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Grace. To complete the picture, are you sleeping?
No.
How are you? How are you people? Good is great. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. So now we take your input. So how is the scope of your work? Just tell us. We are very curious.
Thank you so much, and thank you to my fellow activists, even those who don't like being referred to as activists. And I'd like to try and answer that question. Can activism change the world?
Yeah.
But then to answer that question, you might decide the first thing to do is then define what activism is. because, as you said, I don't like, I'm famous in Kenya, but I don't like that, being famous. What is my definition of activism? My personal definition of activism is asking questions that need to be asked. Why things are not the way they're supposed to be. To me, it's that simple. If there's a road that is not supposed to be built, then you ask, why is it being built? Without consulting the people. If there's a road that is supposed to be built and it has not been built, then when you ask, why has it not been built, then that is activism. Yeah, so you're an activist. With that definition, for me, all of humanity are activists, because human advancement, creativity, art and music, what we call in Kenya activism, using art to progress ideas. Progression always comes from people questioning why things are the way they are and could they be better. And to me, that way then everybody is an activist, or if they are not, they should be. It's not some bad word. So can activism change the world? To me, activism is the only thing that has changed the world positively. One of the activists I admire from way back is Jesus Christ. He changed the world. He's still changing the world, although I'm not a Christian. I was born Christian, but I'm no longer Christian. Prophet Muhammad changed the world by questioning, could his society be better? Buddha, and many other famous activists, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, just to mention a few famous ones, Thomas Sankara from Burkina Faso, and many other. I'm sure here there are many Austrian activists, some famous, some infamous. I won't mention names, but we know one who changed the world in the 1920s. Not very positively, but it's that space of where, when you suppress humanity, then either positive or negative things rise out of that questioning. And what we are fighting for as Africans rising, and there's a reason why, if you notice, it's Africans rising, not Africa rising, because there's another narrative of Africa rising, as if Africa is a continent without people. But us, we are focused on the people of Africa rising, being able to self-actualize, to achieve their aspirations. There are a lot of dreams that are dying, not only on the continent. I'm sure Europe is also struggling with, part of the problem when migrants are trying to come in, others are dying in the Mediterranean Ocean, trying to cross over to Europe. And the question is, why are we not all working towards an Africa that works for Africans, so that nobody has to leave Africa to come and look for better opportunities? If there's any exchanges from that point of cooperation or human advancement or sharing of ideas, sharing of cooperation, sharing of the human experience. And we know a lot of the wealth that is in Europe, that is in America, that is in the most of the world right now, and over the last 400 years, was created from an extractive system, which we call colonialism. There's the colonialism of the past, and then there's neo-colonialism, neoliberal policies that have been pushed by the West up to now, privatizing of public services. When I move around Vienna, I'm seeing very advanced transport systems that we can only dream of in Africa, in most of African countries, the trams, the subway, and that is a reflection of the investment the people of Austria have done, their governments, on behalf of the taxes that everybody here pays. In Africa, we pay taxes, and those taxes, we don't see what they do. In fact, those taxes are used to guarantee loans that usually come from Europe and America and China, and then they end up in a few people's pockets, and then those people come and buy houses in Vienna or other African, other European countries for their own personal investment and advancement, while the people who they are supposed to be ensuring have a good education or a good health system now have to get into boats to try and come to Europe. And when we question this, then we are called activists. And when you're given that title, activists, it's not a polite thing, usually. Usually it's, you're being insulted or you're being called someone who is anti the system or anti
troublemaker.
Anti-government, you're a troublemaker. And as I've said, asking questions why things are not the way they should not be a problem. And Africans Rising is a movement that talks about creating unity for Africans, creating peace, we are very clear on that, justice for Africans, and then restoring dignity. And just to use the same example, dignity is when I don't have to rise up, try to cross borders without, where it's very hard for an African to move from one country to the other up to now. And then get onto a boat because I can't find dignity within my society. I have to go and look for it elsewhere. And the Africans Rising campaign on Borderless Africa is actually, the irony of it is that the systems that are all over the continent enforcing borders are actually installed by the European Union. Yet the European Union has removed borders from all over Europe, but it's enforcing borders in Africa. So, that's part of the neocolonialism. And so that, and also climate change. We talk about so many issues that people are, agitating against or organizing against around activism. To me, there's only one single issue. And the single issue for me is the survival of humanity. And that is what climate change threatens, because then issues of livelihoods, issues of gender violence, issues of survival are all, there's a lot of hubris in humanity. France spoke about the fact that climate change as an issue has not gained traction in Europe, in most of Europe. They don't see it as an existing crisis right now. They see it as a crisis that will come in the future. But the thing is, climate change is affecting people in Africa, people in the third world, much more today because of the extractivism, the extraction that is still ongoing, that is perpetuated by European companies, American companies, Chinese companies, and all that, resources coming from Africa. To date, despite the so-called independence of African countries, in collaboration with our political leadership, our elite in Africa, who are, extracting these resources, money, human resource, and that kind of thing, and continuing so that even the people who are now, for example, in Mozambique, facing a cyclone, which has happened in the last, 1 decade, things that we've never seen on the continent, like cyclones now are happening in Africa, and we don't have the capacity to deal with them. We don't have the infrastructure to deal with them. And even though it's not affecting people in Europe at a personal level, it will affect you when, I know there are issues here in Austria around migration. I think there's a huge conflict that is festering. A political conflict which rightists, political organizing has been able to mobilize against as Africa. That's a direct result of this single issue of the threat to humanity. And we have the hubris of humanity that we need to save the earth. We don't need to save the earth. What we need to save is humanity. The threats we have are the humankind as we know it. And only through activism and through us raising these issues can we start seeing how interconnected we are. And the fact that right now we are here, some of us, from Africa, some from Austria, some joining via Zoom, is the fact that that's actually a demonstration of how connected we are in all these issues. So our connectivity, our humanity is what then makes us all activists, in my view. Even those who don't consider, I don't know, maybe you should ask with the cards how many people think they are activists now based on that explanation. How many people here ask questions? Yeah? And that think that activism is a good thing and can change the world. I can see there's one yellow, but mostly green cards, And so, yeah, so that would be my take, that activism is, even when you ask why my coffee is not hot enough in the house, that is activism. So that's my take.
Thank you very much, Mutebe. Now I'm activist, but I still want to know.
Embrace it.
I still want to know. Lucia mentioned that in this fight or in this activism, it's good to know the forces in places. It's good to know the enemy. Have you identified yours in your fight, in the framework of these Africans rising? Whom do you address? Who's your enemy? Who you are?
Actually, yeah, that's a very good question. Our very able coordinator, Hadi Yakubu, when he spoke, he actually said we are very clear on who the enemy is. And the enemy is the status quo. The status quo being anybody who's working to maintain the systems as they are today. Despite evidence, not only from Africa, but also from Europe and the advanced world, that things cannot continue as they are. But nobody is actively working to change. We actually have a lot of research papers developed both in Africa, in the West, and all over. We've had a lot of conversations, I think, here in Austria, which have teased out what the issues are and proposed possible solutions, maybe over the last 3 decades, but nothing is happening. So that status quo that is holding the situation as it is, when we all know it cannot go on as it is, that is the enemy for Africans rising.
Yeah, yes. But then now you are in this globalized system, where maybe the figure you mentioned that are exploiting things, they are very far away. So the only, like say, victims you've got will be the local one, because you cannot fight, I don't know.
Let me give you an example
Americans.
That maybe people have not thought about. So I come from Kenya. In 2013, there was a phenomenon, there was an election in Kenya. And during these elections, the person who won, who was the previous regime of the last 10 years of Uhuru Kenyatta, hired a little-known company then to handle the public relations. This company used a different name, but it is what came to be known as Cambridge Analytica. So they used Kenya's election to manipulate narratives, to use social media to create tensions and practice. And then after that, they used what they learned, how to manipulate sentiment to influence the American election, to get Donald Trump elected. They used it to influence Brexit and many other right-wing governments that are now in Europe. So you think you're not connected, but these guys are now able to install leadership that the people here don't want, but they are able to mobilize resources to hire. I'm sure Cambridge Analytica was disbanded, but I'm sure more than 100 more other companies are able to use today the same technology to manipulate sentiment, to install regimes in power that are not working for humanity. That's the enemy. So even you think we are not connected, we are very interconnected. That's one example. Of course, the migrant crisis that is happening in Europe because of the despotism that is all over the third world. So, well, you tell me, what do you think?
I think you're doing a great job. Because also like embracing so many fields, I mean, from climate to migration, and they are big, like, so thank you very much for doing this.
So I will stress it again, for me, it's a single issue. It's survival of humanity, that we can't go on as we've been going on. And the way to advance is to develop mutual cooperation. Yeah. Is to develop respect for each other, is to invest together, plan together. Africa has the capacity to employ all these people who are coming to look for jobs in Europe. They don't need to leave the continent. Really? They need to come here for tourism only, you know. Or if you know, I love it. Yeah. And we have those resources.
Can you sign it here for me? Thank you for the hope you're giving us. Now we want to check in the chat. We've got some questions there. And yeah.
Thank you, Teglia. So far, 2 questions to Mutemi. The first one is from Zoom user. And he's asking, how can we ensure that the messages are sent and being delivered to the recipient accordingly? And then there's a question from Doris Olela. What is the future of activism in the social, political, economic space? Also for Mutemi, but I think also for the others maybe.
Thank you. I hope my colleagues will also try to respond. Part of the way to ensure the message is being delivered is such conversations. That's why we've traveled all the way from Africa to Vienna, and we thank Franz and his organization for making this possible, also in collaboration with Africans Rising. VIDC has, graciously hosted this conversation here. And I can tell you, I don't really attend many civil, I've been in civil society official for about 10 years, and I stopped attending civil society meetings because there's a lot of talk and no action. That's why we're organizing the movement spaces. But I felt that this conversation is very important in that, the approach from just this question, because I'm involved in the action spaces, and the action spaces where the activists are. People are organizing. A lot of them are not looking for any limelight. They are not looking for any glory. They are working with communities all over across Africa. I'm sure even here in Europe. There are activists who are working with communities, and they are not looking for media limelight. They're just mobilizing their community. And so part of the way to ensure the message is being delivered is to go to the spaces where those conversations are happening. It's to host such events, more of such events across the continent, across Europe, but also in Africa. There's someone who asked me, why are you going to have that conversation in Europe when it should be happening in Africa? And my feeling is that it should happen in all the spaces, both in Africa and in Europe, and also in the villages in Africa, so that we dignify the people who are coming up. The solutions to these challenges are actually among the people within Africa, but what we might lack is the resources and the political will But also in Africa, one of the things that we have, and I think I'm responding to both questions with this response, is that our African diaspora are some of the most enterprising people that I know of. Regarding whether they've come here for education, then settled in Austria or in Europe, or whether they crossed borders illegally or legally, that takes a lot of courage and enterprise to be able to do that. I think a lot of people have taken crazy risks crossing the Sahara, crossing the Mediterranean, and I think they do, when they settle here, they work extremely hard, and then they invest back home. They take care of their families and that kind of thing. So we are saying that the diaspora, the people in the diaspora now need to get involved directly in the governance of the countries where they come from. Because I know a lot of Africans who are sending money back home to their parents, their brothers and sisters, and that money is being misused, despite them working extremely hard, maybe 2, 3, 4 jobs, to just save enough money to be able to send back home or invest back home. And the governments that are supposed to ensure that whatever they're investing in is safe are not helping them. Yet in my country, Kenya, right now, last week there was a law that is being, I think, passed or proposed that says people in the diaspora have also to pay tax back home, despite them paying tax here. Yet the government played no role in ensuring that they come to Austria and earn their money. But now, when they are helping their mothers and brothers and sisters who are suffering back home, that money is going to be taxed by those governments that are also oppressing. So we want the diaspora to be involved politically, to support the political movements that are trying to democratize Africa, to support the civil society. Then that message becomes up. So we hope that the African diaspora will organize itself and work with us to help make Africa work for Africans.
Thank you. Thank you. Jason, back to you. How do you make sure your message is being well received to the person you address it? Is it well received?
Yeah, so it depends on a number of things, of course. And I think if I go back to the example of what happened here with the education, it was made an issue, and it was risen enough so that the populations around in Vienna and Austria knew that this was a problem. So because we already spread that sort of highlight, it forced engagement. Well, I shouldn't say forced, but it created the opportunity for engagement with the Austrian Ministry of Education. If this wasn't called out to be such an issue, then maybe it's not a problem, right? And they don't need to turn up. Right, and it goes on, as Mtui said, it goes in many different ways. It goes, whether it be in education, or whether it be in literally any variable you can think of. Because if I go back to the people's deaths that Pamoja made sure there was a march, made sure there was media coverage. I don't know if me complaining about 8 months not being a sufficient sentence would have even been taken into consideration, because they might not have even been charged. Right? So control of our own forms of media is important. Creating roots of media. Voices are not necessarily highlighted when they are spoken. So you can speak your truth, but in what spaces are you speaking it, and what reach does it have, is a question. And I mean, in today's world, we're starting to gain a stronger footing because we are creating our own platforms within these social media places, and sometimes it runs wild. But I think there's a lot to be done. I think there's a lot to be done in the sense of creating good reach in media. For me, that's a major thing that I miss.
In your own media, your own platform, or you need like allies from established media.
Exactly.
It's like if you have your own media, you're talking to yourself. So, talking to
right. If you have your own, I don't know, platform on Instagram with 5 followers, you say as much as you want. Talk it up,
Yeah.
So, and honestly, there's a need for us to be unified.
Yeah.
There's a need for us as groups collectively to be unified. I spoke against, when George Floyd movement happened, I spoke and I created a video repeating the speech. And it was the individuals that actually made the video go viral as opposed to the community groups. And it's almost like, you're part of that group and maybe we don't interact. And I think that's something that we need to talk about as well. So we need to be very vocal and very supportive, and not be fearful to, like I said, to call out the elephant in the room when necessary. So going against the status quo, because what will happen is we can create these platforms, but if we haven't got strong individuals that are willing to speak their mind fully, then everything is muted. The realities aren't challenged. The status quo is not challenged. And that's why I say that I welcome myself as the quirk who's not the expert in climate activism. I strongly believe in my value sitting in this space.
Of course.
Right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I see. I see. Thank you. Grace, who's your audience? How do you make sure they receive your message?
I think I'm very passionate about political processes. And so for me, it's encouraging the connection of issues to the political structure that we have to deal with, that's present in form of a state. And so one of my own transition from just an activist where I thought that I was just screaming at power has been journaling into moving to understand about this political leadership and roles and the capabilities that are needed for them, and to also realize that while we keep asking people to do the things we want, who do not have the plan the way we have it, perhaps we could also present ourselves to lead. Because even when I see a lot of climate change movement here in Europe, I see a lot of young people present, but then the little conversations that I've had in terms of their interest in political parties or presenting themselves as leaders in these political parties, then people just shy away and say, no, that's not for me, I don't trust them, or things like that. And I find the world is where we are because good people feel like they are too good for the process or the political processes that are present for us. And so my challenge is always to, let's push ourselves into the ballot, beyond the ballot, present your case, your strategy to the community. And if you get some votes, then you get some votes, because being part of this process for me in Uganda has taught me a lot about my community, the status of multipartism that we have as a country, which has put me in a reality check. It's not good. And until then, I would have had very high expectations of what could actually be possible. But now I know that as a country, we are still grumbling with the whole process. We are still learning about political systems. We do not trust political parties. We trust individuals, and what that even means when you trust in individuals and not political parties and the dynamics around it. So,
and in this setting, is it a need for allies abroad, like having partners in Europe that are fighting the same fight, or you are happy as you are? No need for...
No. Today I was chatting with friends and I got to know that in my country, when the current regime came to power, they came with the National Resistance Movement. They came with a 10-point program. And the 10-point program was written here in Austria, and which gives an opportunity or the realization that the Africans in the diaspora have so many opportunities to reflect, to learn from what's working here, what's failing here, and perhaps to mobilize themselves and their influence, since they have beneficiaries back home, and what all that is for our communities. It's a huge power that is there that one can choose to use or not. And I think it should be used.
Thank you. It will be good.
Pleasure.
If Lucia agrees, because I'm going to ask her, do you think these young people fighting in Uganda can fight the same fight as the young people you are in Austria? Are they the same target, the same goals? They're pursuing the same goals? Is it a need that they join, or it could be a threat that they join to for example, to fight the climate change?
I think definitely we need to join, and I think we are only slowly progressing on this, but the next big point, I think, is a very good example for this, because in only 1.5 weeks there is the big European gas conference happening in Vienna, where the biggest fossil corporations, including Shell, including BP, RWE, who just destroyed Lützerath in Germany, for example, but also Total, who is a French corporation who is even killing climate activists in Mozambique, for example. They all meet here in Vienna.
And Uganda too.
And Uganda.
They're building a pipeline from Uganda to Tanzania.
Gas too, who is building a big pipeline from North Africa to Spain, and they're all meeting here with big capital representatives, for example, from BlackRock, but also representatives of the European Union, and they're really trying to bring on huge, massive infrastructure to lock us into this fossil, exploitative, unjust, and also very violent energy system for the next decades. And so last, I think, June, there was an online event also with activists or anti-gas activists in African countries, for example, Mozambique, and they said something that really stuck to my mind, like we're fighting this extractivism here, but where the corporations sit, that's in Europe, that's in the US, for example. And so you have to block them. And I think it's really our responsibility here to stop them and not let that happen and go and disturb this conference.
Yeah. But I'm still struggling with the idea that
with the what?
Coming back to this future in regard of social economics aspect. While you're stopping them, there are people there, I'm sure, also in Uganda, that are waiting for them in order for them to have a job, in order for them to have a food. So they are not like on the same level, like while we were sitting in lockdowns, they couldn't afford to sit in the lockdown. They couldn't stay at home because they need to go every day out the house in order to eat.
Could I give an example from the Africa?
But let's have, if she has a word, then you will complete. And if
she has to test me first.
Well, you're my enemy. I'm an activist.
I think what we have to fight for is for us to have jobs, for us to have livelihoods that are not based on destroying people's lives, and we have to see, I think, that the jobs these corporations create and that the damages and the the destruction they create are not distributed equally over the globe. So I think the well-paid jobs that Total offers are not in the Republic of Congo or not in Uganda, but the destruction and the extractivist projects they are advancing are not in France. So.
Yeah, and you're right. That's what you wanted to say.
Yeah, something to that. I want to show you something. I don't know that you can see that logo.
What is it?
It's decolonized, coal.
Okay.
Coal, decolonize.
Decolonize.
So this is a Kenyan movement that mainly organized around stopping a coal plant from being built in Lamu, one of the most pristine places in Kenya, at the Kenyan coast. And the coal plant would have destroyed the environment that city is also one of the UNESCO heritage sites. But the marketing of the project by the government and the people who wanted to build the project was that it was going to create jobs. It was going to increase electricity in Kenya. The project would have created maybe 1,000 jobs, but it would have destroyed,
of course,
100,000 acres of pristine land, marine life, and that kind of thing. And initially, the people of Lamu were very supportive of the project because they were told to create jobs. And then what this movement did and others was that we went and gave them information in terms of these are the pros and cons of such a project. And this is what coal is doing to the planet. And essentially, the people turned against the project. We gave them information, and then when they were informed, they were able to make a decision in terms of whether the project would be good or bad for them. The project that Total is doing in Uganda is one of the most oppressive regimes in Africa. We've not been able to do that kind of sensitization to the people because the regime in Uganda, which is mainly funded by the West in the name of security and fighting terror, uses the same security forces to oppress activists like Grace and others, so that they cannot then sensitize the people of Uganda. So the kind of cooperation, the question you asked whether there's something that can be done between Ugandan activists and European activists or Austrian activists, yes. Actually, European activists can stop Total right here in Europe. If we are unable to stop, I think the European Parliament already made a decision around Total, and that project is not something that they will support. And that is as a result of the work that European activists have done to be able to work to stop that project. Of course, the president of Uganda is not very happy about that. But it's what it is. So that's the kind of cooperation that we together can do, to kind of work towards some of these projects. We were able to stop this project by going to court, but also by building solidarity, not just with the local communities. When global organizations like Greenpeace, 350.org came on board, and it became a movement, the decolonized movement. Now it's actually a Pan-African movement around stopping these extractive energy projects across the continent. So that is what is possible.
Thank you. You've just convinced me. Thank you. So now we have time to share questions and suggestions, arguments. Ooh, I need a referee. Let's start with the lady. Nadia, help me. Yeah.
Hello everyone. Hi, I'll start by introducing myself shortly. I'm Hajar Issa, an activist myself from Sudan. Yeah, and a member of the World Liberty Congress currently. An Obama leader as well. So I don't have a question actually, but I would like to add up to what Mr. Moteme added a few minutes ago regarding if activism can change the world or not. I believe that it's strongly connected to our governments back in Africa. This is something that I totally admit was in my former experience. If you want to do anything in Africa, regardless, if it's like education promotion, if it's like fighting for peace, fighting for your own right is an issue. So I believe that we need to start with the government. Unless our dictators are changed, we cannot. But activism is strong enough to change the world, to change every step that we're taking. So, and also like for the people to start with humanity as well. Together, we can make a difference. But if one person is fighting and the other one is not, and if we don't come together, then that's going to be an issue. So, like going back to the government issue, like from my own experience, I was just trying to start an initiative. It's called the Darfuri Women Movement. Just for me to get the permission, it took me 2 years to get a piece of paper that I didn't need in the end. So we need to do something about the government, and activism take many faces. If it was music, if it was just having a voice, would make a change. So we just need to keep it positive. That's what I need to add.
Thank you so much for the inspiration.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, thank you. It's a great event, and also thank you for the VIDC. I like to add this young lady who just said, that's what I was going to say. End of the day, activism does not bear any responsibility. The question is how the activist will bring the social issue to the politicians and to watch everybody's interests involved to get the job done. That's the question. Thank you.
Wait a minute. Somebody want to take this one? How to bring the issue to the politicians?
I think Grace even suggested how to.
Yeah, that's your platform now.
Yeah, sure. I think when I began actively in activism was about 2010, 2011, and then social media was quite new, and a lot of politicians were excited equally to be present on whether it's Facebook or Twitter. And then we were doing a lot of trainings on how to share issues to cut through the bureaucracy that we have and just write directly to the members of parliament. So this is 2011. I think over time, I think now there's a whole different conversation that happens, and the fake news and all that. So, but there can still be a model to which messages are passed. There's, as a movement, I think we do align with a lot of non-violent means, but that does not mean that if within context, other means that are used in self-defense or in others that then would say, oh, we do not align. So it's contextual. And so on that frontier, we also know that there's so many spaces that exist on the continent that do not have state control. So when that happens, then we are able to support or align or allow members to support or others to abstain, depending on really the issue. And I think for me, the model that I love is when activists present themselves as into elective politics, because I think that's the only way you'll be able to know whether your community actually agrees with you or does not agree with you, or will only agree with you if you give them some facilitation, some money. So it's, I think just present yourself. Yeah.
I would also like to answer to this question, because I would answer that the politics and the politicians are also part of the problem, and that the current system, the so-called democracy, is part of the problem as well, how it is designed now, because we are not asked whether we want to burn millions of tons of coal. The law criminalizes activists who stand up against the destruction instead of those corporations who make big money on destroying our livelihoods. So I think we have to have this double strategy that Alexander likes to use, of fighting for concrete improvements, concrete victories, and what you just said, getting rid of corrupt governments and dictators, but at the same time always striving to transform these structures and not just ask politicians. And this question of responsibility, I think there are so many communities who I think have organized and have been responsible for each other for decades and centuries, because governments never cared about them and never defended their interests. So I think that activism does not have any responsibility. I think I would disagree on that, and I think that while fighting for concrete changes and steps, even tomorrow we have to build the structures and more radical democratic forms of organizations and decision makings of the day after tomorrow.
Could I also just add something? So partly agree with what you said and partly disagree in terms of when you talk about the status quo. It's the same politicians today who are facilitating the mess we are in. And part of what you're doing is movements on the continent, the movement apart of in Kenya, and the movement, the Africans Rising movement, is trying to think of the citizen of the next 10, 15, 20 years, partly because the current regimes, current citizens are caught up in that status quo. They're in the box, they can't think outside the box. So how do we get the younger generation that will be mostly affected by the single issue, as I said, of climate change, and which to me is the main thing around human rights, around the conflict that we're going to see in the future, will be about that. When most development organizations, funders, fund 1-2 year programs, and they're not funding the political organizing of the politicians who are opposed to these politicians who are supporting the fossil fuel movement. So how do we ensure that the kids who are 7, 8 years old, when they get old enough to vote in 10 years' time, vote for a different kind of politician? And how do we ensure grace is that politician that we vote for, not the current ones? How do we get grace to Parliament to pass the laws that need to change? So it's a nexus of activism, but also political organizing. But also, how do we think around, if the system has failed, this system is not working, and it's not just in Africa, it's not working. I think even here in Europe is a struggle, in North America is a struggle. What other systems can we build that work, that can work for humanity? For me, it's and humanity will find a solution. And that's what activism will do. It will help us find that solution.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's check the chat, because they are very far away. Do we have questions in the chat? Zoom chat?
So we have a very lively discussion, not only questions. So yeah, no, it's interesting. And, and the discussion is about, so the question was by Kwame Stevens. So what is more important, uniting Africa or climate change actions hustle, he said. And then a debate raises up, or comes up, and the answer is, I think, made by Pitbin Odimwengu. Unity comes before any other action. Therefore, African unity is paramount, and it's the foundation of development.
Clap, 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 clap. Yeah.
Okay, explain. Why are you clapping that loud?
Of course,
Please use the mic.
100%. I can only agree with that 100% because without unity, without African unity, we are not strong enough to withstand the oppression that we feel since 400 years by the Western powers that rule the world and that have made the system that we live in. And that also support those so-called terrorists that they are fighting on the continent. Because I do not believe in terrorism. I am sorry. I do not believe in terrorist groups. I believe in indigenous groups that are fighting for their own freedom and to fight back this oppression and the depletion of their resources. And they are then called terrorists for then France or whoever it is to send in their armies to drop bombs on them or even maybe arm them so they can fight, so we can fight each other, you see? So that is why I absolutely agree that it is paramount that we have unity in Africa. And after we gain this unity, this dignity, this justice for ourselves, then we can actually fight back against this oppression and against all these environmental problems that we have, yes, that are created in Europe. And yes, unless European children start dying here, and unless European activists get shot by police here in Europe, I think that it is going to be a very difficult struggle because, and why I say this is because actually on the ground, and we have heard this from a few of the panel people that discuss on the panel, that it is our people that are being shot. It is our people, when they raise their hand, they get it chopped off, they get thrown in jail, they get raped, they get murdered, villages get pillaged, and they get driven away from their homes. And that is the tragedy, yes, that we do not see, that it is our people dying each and every day. And that's why I am so crude by saying, unless their children die here, yes, when they go to fight Total and Shell and all these people that bring death and sorrow on our continent, on the motherland, then I think it will it will take a very long time until change actually happens. But yes, of course, activism is important and we need it.
Thank you for the positive last word.
Can I piggyback off the back of his strength?
Just one word. If you can tell it in one word, yes. In two, no. One word.
No, it won't work because it's a question.
Okay, then in the break. Because we have two other persons that I really want to take. Excuse me. Like
there's one more question to Claire. Sorry.
Yeah?
One more question from the...
Yeah, please.
That was the discussion, and then there was one concrete question. Please, I would like, from Kunim, from Ghana, please, I would like to know what measures needs to be put in place to ensure activists are safe and protected, and also how do we sustain activism to stand the test of time and be able to strive over the forces that tries to silence activism.
That's what we have just answered in some way.
I mean, actually, then I can add to it then. So basically, instead of framing it as a question, I'm still going to put it out there. The reality, like Topake was saying, is that it's going to take an eternity if it's not presented right on Western doorsteps. And regarding the leadership that we, have issues with, my question was going to be, how can we deal with that? Because ultimately, we do know that it's a lot of puppetry, right? A lot of the leaders are puppets who have been placed in these positions to hold back people that want to move forward. So my question was actually looking to find out, how can we counter something, especially because, I love your willingness to be present within the political discourse and to even be present as seen and visible and an active player in that political arena. I've always been quite despondent when I think about the great hierarchy that exists in politics and how we're always demonizing African leaders, which if you ask me, I'm not supporting them, but I do recognize if you see this guy's neck getting chopped off in front of you for holding that position, when you get in that position, are you going to say, I'm going forward for my neck to be chopped off? Or are you going to say, well, let me just scurry a little bit here, put aside to my family? This is a serious issue. And instead of demonizing our leaders, I'm looking to find how can we caveat this issue, because it's something that doesn't often get brought up in conversation, let alone by people that are really engaged in it and being pushed back because of this leadership. So that's why I wanted to frame it as a question instead of kind of pushing the idea.
Whether diaspora will step into action, as I've been experiencing, like in this
I can
setting,
actually
no?
answer that in a few words. Is actually, that is what Africans Rising is all about. It's not about complaining. It's not about demonizing. It's about organizing and building a new political movement. Africans Rising is organizing politically across the continent and in the diaspora to make sure that we have leadership that is responsive to Africans' issues. So you're not complaining anymore. You're mobilizing ourselves to
position of power.
To seize power and use that power for the.
If I'm honest, as my long intro was there, this is one of the things I really wanted to talk about and to like bring it forward, because that's what's necessary, is to come out of this victim mindset, come out of this shrunken position in these spaces, and to be able to call out, as I said, the elephant in the room, as Topa K did, and as we are doing now. Bring ourselves fully to the table.
Sorry to say, without the North Africans, without the North Africans being in this organization, it will work. Because they will go through the North Africans to destroy the Black Africans. Except work, come unite together, and then it will work. Must tell the truth. No African, no North African, no Egypt, nothing, nobody here. Only the black ones. Is that Africans? Are we the only Africans?
So, quickly, I know there are some questions that are on the table. Just to say, it's a comment.
My suggestion is that tomorrow holiday we have a workshop where we will be dealing in depth about those questions. Today we have gathered ideas, experiences, and we will take some questions back home. Do you agree? Show your green card.
But can I say something?
So now I would just like invite the panel to say a last word so that we take the question tomorrow to the workshops, if you agree, or maybe afterwards, because now we are like out of time. Okay, like you start with the last word, because the first time we did like that.
I actually wanted to.
Excuse me?
You never give me a chance to answer my question. You didn't answer my question.
No, I'm responding to you now.
That's why the last round is about. Because now they have the last round, and they will come back to your question.
So, and my last comment, and also in response to what my brother has said, is that
good idea.
I talked about extraction from colonialism, and the continued extraction right now is basically what you're talking about, is extraction of resources from Africa. And the extraction has been able to continue to date because of the initial strategy that was used to extract, which is divide and rule. Divide the people of Africa so that you can rule them, and that still happens. That's what my brother is talking about. So Africans Rising is working to unite Africa. So you talk about removing the borders, the people of Africa. Our politicians work for other interests. That's what you're inferring to. They are puppets of these corporations from the West, from China, from wherever. And the way to count, if they've divided us to rulers, then it's a no-brainer. What you need to do is unite to defeat them. That's what our brother is saying. So that's what Africans Rising is about. So all Africans here, please join the movement. And even non-Africans can also join, and let us join in solidarity to build a different world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lucia, your last word.
Yeah, I think what the climate movement has to do is adding to what you said, stop talking about our futures and recognize that it's about the present, and also what you have said, the past of many people. And while we definitely have to also fight the racism in ourselves, I think we still have to not just whine about our privileges, but still get out there and block, for example, the gas conference in 10 days, and stop
campaigning, no?
Stop this fossil exploitative system. And yes, an invitation to all of you. In exactly 2 weeks from now on, we're going to have a demonstration, 6 p.m. at Stephansplatz, and also very good news, many comrades from Don't Gas Africa are coming for this conference, and we are going to have an anti-colonial blog to see how these struggles are united against extractivism and the climate crisis.
Thank you. But the regime will cut the advertisement. Grace, your last word.
I think when I've inspired learning a lot by the response in Europe around energy discussion and how willing people accepted the use of different non-renewable energy means in this name of emergencies. And I realized that I think people here do not realize Africa is faced with multiple emergencies. And the conversation on sustainability takes precedence. And yet for us on the continent, we're talking about survival. Learning that, of course, there's also a question about protection of activists. It's a big problem on the continent. And as Africans rising, it's also one of the realities that we are faced with. And I cannot say that we have all the capabilities and the resources to deal with it. We're just reacting to it and collaborating with like existing institutions that are working on it, like human rights groups. So it's a continued challenge, and anybody has like good ideas on that, of course we're open to collaborate and learn with you. But one of the things I love about Africans Rising is our broad membership. Yes, physically we're just the 2 people that are able to be present here, but our membership is in all the 55 countries on the continent. We have many issues that we have to deal with, and yeah, so, but I remain hopeful that we will manage.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Good job. Jesse.
Yes.
Nice words.
You know, sometimes harsh words are necessary too. I think, in all honesty, I would encourage everyone to bring their fullness to the table, bring themselves to the table. So what do I mean by that? When you hear something like Topake said, that happens over there, we can so easily just, it's like just another person died, isn't it? So we've become very shrunk in the way that we engage in life itself, period. And I think the more fully we turn up as people is the quicker we will see this change occur that we're looking for. You have to be part of it. It's what you eat in the fridge, it's the same. Yeah? How often you change in this, it's the same. So you bring yourself into the conversation by being full. Don't just take these things as blind things that you do. You are here and you're affected by choices you make here and now. Great work by You know what I mean? Stopping the low bow, being present on that front. But you don't have to go there and turn up at a low bow to be making changes every day. You don't have to wait for that time to come. You can do it now by every little step you're taking. Even the fact that you come here today and those who didn't. It's a choice. And we have to ask ourselves what's important and where our priorities lie. So bring yourself fully to the table is all I say.
Beautiful. Beautiful. We can hear you. Oh, I can
Yes, the mic's there now.
Okay, thank you. I was saying, I feel like what I'd like to share is pressing on me to share it, and I know we're out of time, but just allow me 2 minutes of your time. Good evening, everyone. My name is Beryl. I'm from Kenya. And if you allow me, I'd like to share a small anecdote and to respond to the theme of this discussion. Yes, activism can and will change the world. And I'd like to share one of my favorite quotes from a passage by Marianne Williamson, excuse me. Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You're a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we consciously give other people permission to do the same. As we're liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. I feel this passage is very powerful. And speaking to what Muteni Wakiyama said, that we should encourage children. Growing up, I had so many brilliant ideas of how to make change, how to, speak about different things, pollution included, climate change. And as I grew older, I became desensitized to this because you are kind of told that you're too small. What can you do? What change can you make? And I feel like I wanted to speak to each of us here and say that activism starts at an individual level. Yes, we ought to hold politicians and people in power responsible, but it starts with each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you. To close up, we also have a poem from the panel. Okay. We will now finish with. Please, Jason.
Okay. So I have a piece here called Mother Is. Mother's lungs are forests of trees, and like us, she breathes. Her veins are rivers, oceans, and streams running like blood to a heartbeat. You know, her children massage her skin with their feet. In truth, she stores black gold in her folds. Her womb gives birth to crystals and stardust minerals. Her story, not his, is beyond biblical. She is forever impregnated by Papa's son. Her aura bathes us like a roots fruit halo juice. But mother gets sick by the continual womb raiding, stressed and tortured through penile raping, missile heads penetrating, but see, Mars' wonders never cease. Her body, like ours, is self-healing. Her volcanoes and floods free her from diseases. She's a mother like all mothers, a life giver, a nurturer, a spirit, a soul. She defined and is shaped by the feminine principle. Her energies create life for everything living within and on her. A life sustainer, feeding her children like mother's milk for babies. Yes, mother is.
Thank you very much from the panel. And the last question, you think activism can change the world? Great improvement. No yellow card anymore. That's very happy. Drink. Oh, because you answered right. I think there's a drink waiting for us outside. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you very much.
Thank you.